In the summer of 63 BC, a Roman senator named Marcus Livius stood trembling in the Forum Romanum, wearing nothing but a transparent linen tunic that left him effectively naked before thousands of Romans who had once called him colleague and friend. His senatorial shoes had been removed. His toga, the white wool garment with its distinctive purple stripe that marked him as a Roman citizen of the highest class, had been stripped away and lay discarded in the dust. His hands were bound tightly behind his back with rough rope that cut into his wrists, and in his mouth was a wooden bit, the kind used on horses, forcing his jaw open so wide he could not speak in his own defense or even close his lips with dignity. A herald stood beside him, unrolling a long scroll with deliberate slowness, and began reading in a voice that carried across the entire forum, listing Marcus's crimes for all to hear. Embezzlement of public funds meant for grain distributions to the poor, bribery of magistrates to secure contracts for his associates, betrayal of the Senate's sacred trust. After each accusation, the herald paused dramatically, and a man with a flagrum, a multi-tailed whip tipped with small pieces of metal, stepped forward and struck Marcus across his bare back. The crowd counted each strike in unison, their voices rising with each number. 1, 2, 3. By the 10th strike, Marcus was weeping openly, tears streaming down his face as saliva dripped from his forced open mouth, his humiliation complete before the physical punishment had barely begun. By the 20th strike, he had collapsed to his knees in the dirt, no longer able to stand. By the 30th, he was begging incoherently through the bit in his mouth for mercy that would never come, making sounds that were barely human. Marcus Livius survived that day in the Forum. The beating was not designed to kill him, and the magistrates overseeing the punishment were careful to ensure he remained conscious throughout the entire ordeal. The punishment was designed to destroy something far more important than his body, something that every Roman understood was more valuable than physical life itself. It was designed to destroy his dignitas, his honor, his social existence, a Roman man of rank, and it succeeded completely. Within a week, Marcus had taken his own life not because of his injuries, which were actually healing under a physician's care, but because he could not bear to continue living in a world where thousands of people had watched him reduced to something less than human, something less than a man, something that wept and begged and broke before their eyes like a slave or an animal. His suicide was not seen as tragic. It was seen as appropriate, even honorable, the only possible response for a man who had lost everything that made life worth living. This was not unusual. This was not considered excessive or cruel by Roman standards. This was Roman justice in its purest form. This was what happened to people who violated the social order in a civilization that believed honor was more valuable than life itself, that believed humiliation was a more effective punishment than execution, that believed destroying a person's reputation and dignity was the most complete form of justice available to the state. This is the story of the most horrific public humiliations in ancient Rome, and these are not the clean deaths you see in movies or television series, the noble falls on swords or dignified poisonings where heroes die with final words of wisdom. These are the punishments designed specifically to strip away everything that made a person Roman, everything that gave them identity and status and humanity in the eyes of their fellow citizens. These are the rituals that went so far that even Romans themselves sometimes questioned in private whether the cruelty had exceeded the crime. And these are the testimonies preserved in historical sources, in legal texts and philosophical writings, of people who experienced or witnessed humiliations that were universally considered worse than death itself. Before we continue deeper into this darkness, you need to understand what you're about to hear and why it matters. The Romans documented their methods of public humiliation in extraordinary detail. We have legal texts that prescribe specific procedures. We have historical chronicles that describe actual cases. We have the writings of philosophers like Cicero and Seneca who debated the ethics of these punishments and questioned whether a society built on such systematic degradation could claim to be civilized. The sources exist in remarkable abundance. The practices I will describe are attested in ancient documents that have survived for 2,000 years. To understand how honor-based societies enforce social control through systematic humiliation, how punishment can be designed to destroy identity rather than just the body, how entire civilizations can normalize cruelty in the name of order, you need to hear these stories in their full, uncomfortable truth. Roman society in the late Republic and early Empire was organized around a complex, rigid system of social status, honor, and public reputation that governed every aspect of daily life. A Roman's identity was not primarily individual in the modern sense. It was relational, defined entirely by how others perceived and treated you. Your dignitas, your honor and standing in society, depended on maintaining the respect of your peers and the deference of your inferiors. Lose that respect, lose that deference, and you effectively cease to exist as a social being even if you physically survived. You became a ghost walking through a city that no longer saw you as fully human. The concept of dignitas was not some abstract philosophical notion. It had concrete, measurable manifestations in daily life that Romans could point to and quantify. Elite Romans with high dignitas received preferential seating at public games and theatrical performances, placed close to the action where everyone could see them. They were greeted with respect in the streets, with people stepping aside to let them pass. Their opinions carried weight in Senate debates, and their votes could sway outcomes. They could expect favorable treatment in legal disputes, with judges more inclined to believe their testimony. They had access to vast patronage networks that provided economic opportunities and political advancement for themselves and their families. All of this depended on maintaining their honor, on being perceived as worthy of respect every single day. For elite Romans, particularly senators and equestrians, honor was tied to multiple factors that had to be carefully maintained. Your ancestry and family name mattered enormously in a society obsessed with lineage. Romans kept detailed genealogies and could recite their ancestors' achievements going back generations, listing every consulship, every military triumph, every public honor. A man from an old patrician family started life with inherited dignitas that someone whose family had not previously held high office had to work exponentially harder to achieve. Your wealth and property were also crucial, but not in the way modern people might think. Romans expected elite men to display their wealth appropriately, not through ostentatious personal consumption, which was considered vulgar and un-Roman, but through public benefactions, sponsoring games and festivals, building public works like temples and aqueducts, maintaining an impressive household that reflected well on your status. A senator who fell into poverty lost dignitas regardless of his family background or past achievements because poverty suggested an inability to manage affairs properly. Your military achievements and public service added layers to your honor that nothing else could provide. Romans valued martial courage and success above almost every other quality. A man who had commanded armies successfully, who had won battles and been awarded a triumph, the highest military honor, gained enormous dignitas that affected how people treated him for the rest of his life. Public offices also conveyed honor in a hierarchy everyone understood. Being elected consul, the highest magistracy in Rome, marked the absolute pinnacle of a political career and conferred permanent status that extended to your descendants. Your conduct in personal relationships mattered just as much as these public achievements. Romans expected elite men to be faithful to their word under all circumstances, to maintain their client relationships appropriately by providing protection and support to those beneath them, to show proper deference to superiors, while maintaining dignity with equals and displaying appropriate authority over inferiors. A man who broke his word, who abandoned his clients in their time of need, or who acted in a servile manner toward equals lost dignitas even if his wealth and ancestry remained intact, because he had proven himself unworthy of his position. Most important of all was your ability to command respect through gravitas, that quality of seriousness, dignity, and self-control that elite Romans were expected to project at all times in public. A senator who lost his gravitas, who was publicly ridiculed or humiliated, who showed weakness or loss of self-control in a moment of crisis, could not function in Roman society afterward. Other senators would not take him seriously in debates. The people would not respect him or vote for him. His political career was finished. His family's reputation was permanently damaged. His clients would abandon him for patrons who still possessed dignity. In many documented cases, the dishonored person chose suicide as preferable to continuing to live in a state of permanent shame, and Roman society generally viewed such suicides as honorable, as the right choice, as the only choice that could restore some measure of dignity to a ruined life. Understanding this system of honor is essential to understanding why the punishments I am about to describe were so devastating, why they were considered worse than death, why witnesses recorded them with a mixture of fascination and horror. When Marcus Livius stood in that form, stripped of his toga and beaten like a slave, what was being destroyed was not just his body, but his entire social existence.